Okay. We'll change over here. A mini table. Okay, welcome to our Dvar Malchus class. This is on. Yep. Okay. So in today's class, we're going to conclude Parshas Acharei Kedoshim. We spent 4 classes on it. It's a very fundamental explanation on our avoda of what needs to be done to bring Mashiach, so it's worth the extra time. The emesis of Parshas Emor, the Rebbe continued explaining this concept. I'm not sure we're going to do that next. I haven't decided. What we're going to do today is going to be probably a shorter class. We're just going to conclude the last part, which is really phenomenal. I think it's very revolutionary and very, very important for us to get the right perspective. So in the main theme of what we learned till now was that the Rebbe is mechadesh, a real chidush. The Rebbe is giving us tremendous insight that Moshiach is not a new phenomenon. Moshiach is the enlightenment and the godly element revealed in the exile. Moshiach doesn't take us to a different world. Moshiach redeems the exile. And when he redeems the exile, it means everything that previously existed in the exile, including us in an exile state, including the nations of the world, including the entire world that's outside of Eretz Yisrael, including all the possessions and whatever it is that we own and that is part of our lives now, we're not going to forsake them. We're going to discover the depth of them, and that itself is going to liberate them to express themselves to the highest, deepest level of function and expression. And that's Geula. And another point is that even the highest, deepest, greatest phenomenon that is going to be new after Mashiach comes, because there is going to be news, there's going to be Tchias HaMeisim, the resurrection of the dead, and some other amazing things that are going to happen, are all going to be deriving their energy from the work that we did in Galus. Because since the ultimate desire that's going to propel, or not just propel, but that's going to generate, that's the thing, that's going to generate the Geula, and even the deepest levels of the Geula, is the fact that the Eibishter wants a dira betachtonim. The Eibishter wants to express himself in the low. He wants to have a home in the low. So therefore the entire redemption is hinged upon the low. And this world is the low, but when we say this world is the low, the rock bottom low is this world in the time of the exile. And the rock bottom low is this world in the time of exile, when exile is the darkest, which is right before Mashiach comes. So therefore, it's these moments and the work we do within these moments and the discovery of the Eibishter in the most constricted states of mind and of existence. Exactly that is what generates the Gilui of Atzmos, of the Eibishter's essence, which will then bring us all the tremendous lights and revelations and godly experience after Mashiach comes. So it's hinged on the Avodah in Galus, and it liberates the exile itself. That's the idea of the Aleph in Geula. That's what we learned earlier. This, the Rebbe says, and this is what we're holding right now in Perek Yud Beis, or in Sif Yud Beis, the Rebbe then says, with that, by understanding that really takes us to another step, and that is that the process of that really reveals to us another inyan. This is the next stage, and it's a deeper element, and that is that since the whole Geula is derived from the Galus, so we have to say that Bepnimius, on a deeper level, the exile itself has to be helping the Jewish people towards the Geula. Since the entire exile is for the Geula, and not just for the Geula, it produces the Geula, it produces the redemption, so you have to say that the exile itself is assisting the redemption. Because it can't be that it's all about the redemption, and it generates the redemption, but yet it's working against the redemption. So even though the definition of exile is everything opposite of redemption, everything opposite of the simcha and the joy and the pleasure and the delight and the light and the enlightenment and all that of the Geula, exile means pain, suffering, stress, constriction, darkness, and all the negative things that I don't want to talk about. Yet, since it's really b'pnimius meant to be Geula, you have to say that it's assisting Geula. So the very things that fight Geula, b'chitzaynius, are b'pnimius assisting Geula. So let me give a little example for that. Before we continue inside the Sikha. Just to give you an example. We find many things that the Rebbe points out to us in general. For example, this is one thing that comes to my head. When the time of when the Romans made a decree that we're not allowed to read Chumash, Yidden are not allowed to congregate and openly read the Torah on Shabbos. So the Chacham went and they instituted we should read the Haftorah. Now their decree lasted for a while. It could have been it lasted for 10 years. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe it lasted for 20 years. In the end, Rome is not around anymore, and the Jews read the Torah in shul every Shabbos. But had Rome not intervened and tried to stop us from reading the Torah, we would have only been reading the Torah. Now we don't only read the Torah, we read the Navi as well. And in addition to all the incredible godly insight that we get from Navi every week, how much do we learn? And we get even deeper insight in the Parsha by looking at the Haftorah. Plus how much Torah was studied because of the Haftorah, how much ideas and things, how much Chassidus is on the Haftorah. Think about that. In addition to that, we get to say so many blessings in shul. On the Sefer Torah, we make 2 blessings, one before, one after. Okay, there's 7 aliyahs, so there's 14 blessings. But on the Haftorah, we have, another 6, 7 brachas. It's unbelievable. And how did we gain that? By a war against. So you see, something that was fighting, and that's another example. The Yavanim wanted to stop the Jewish people from doing mitzvahs. What's the bottom result? They didn't stop us from doing mitzvahs and from learning Torah. The bottom result is that they gave us Hanukkah. Now, how would the Jewish people survive the exile without those Hanukkah lamps? How much light? How many Jews returned to Yiddishkeit because they saw the public menorahs? But that's just in the last generation. But throughout the generation, think about all the Jews in the darkest moments in the concentration camps in Auschwitz. They lit the menorah and it gave them hope. It lit the flame of hope in their souls. And throughout all the dark ages and the depth of winter, cold, dark nights, Jews derived life, hope, and joy from the Hanukkah menorah. Right? Think about that. And the same is with Haman. You see that every enemy of the Jews only contributed. Only contributed. Let's take another example. Christianity, which was meant in its original time to replace Judaism, to claim that God had abandoned the Jewish people and that he made a new covenant with the new Jews, or the Christians there, the new Jews. And Hashem had forsaken his bond with Israel. What happened in the end? The Rambam says that the real purpose of Christianity is to bring Mashiach awareness to the farthest islands in the world, because Christianity spread across the entire globe, and it brought the idea of monotheism and the idea of Mashiach to the whole planet. And then the Rambam writes this, Maimonides, he says the same thing is about Islam. It also brought the awareness of God, and I think the awareness of redemption. In Islam, I'm not so sure how much the concept of Mashiach. Well, I guess they have some kind of an idea of Mashiach. So the Rambam says they served the Geula. Now, even though how much Jewish blood was spilled in the name of Christianity, how much Jews were persecuted in the name of Islam. But yet, the panemius of it assists. Why does it assist? Since Galus and Geula are not 2 separate phrases. Geula comes to discover the divinity of the Golus, of the darkness. The Dira betachtoinim, the Eibishter is the truth of the Tachton, Shein Tachton Lamatam Mimeni, on the lowest, that there's nothing lower than him, than it, which is the thing that conceals God most. That is truly also only him. And that's the Geula. So as much as that is true in all of exile, that exile, even though it fights Geula, Bepnimius is assisting Geula, it will show itself primarily in the end of exile. As we're getting closer to the Geula, since the whole exile is meant to bring the Geula, and the whole Geula is really the uncovering of what the exile is all about, we can understand the closer we're getting to the end of that transformation. On the one hand, I mentioned earlier that the last moments of exile is the darkest, but on the other hand, as we already begin the redemption process, which in a sense, the redemption process, the entire exile is the redemption process. But particularly as we're getting very close to the end, this inyan comes lidei gilui. In other words, it comes into a revealed, open manner where we can see that the exile itself is assisting the Geula. So how do we see that? So the Rebbe goes ahead and he explains that we see that particularly in the latter generations, in a way that mamish, in a very tangible way. There's a major, major fundamental change of the condition of the Jewish people versus the nations that have exiled them, or the nations that they are exiled in. Their relationship throughout the entire long and bitter exile, and the relationship of the nations and the Jewish people, mamish in the moments before the redemption. Throughout all of Jewish history in the diaspora, we were generally subject to some kind of persecution. We were always under the persecution, whatever types of persecution, whether it was physical persecution, whether it was mental abuse, spiritual persecution. We weren't allowed the freedom to do mitzvahs and the like. Financial persecution, where Jews were heavily taxed unfairly and compared to anyone else. Places we weren't allowed to live, expulsions, pogroms, mass killings, forced baptisms and things like that. That is the lot of about 1,700 years or 1,800 years of exile. And we have to say that that's not natural, that's supernatural. Why the nations were so uncomfortable with the Jewish people, it's a supernatural thing. I mean, on the one hand, you can say wherever Jews came, they brought tremendous prosperity. Jews always brought prosperity. So in a sense, it should be an honor to have the Jews be hosted in a nation. Yet for some reason, why? It makes perfect sense. Because exile is a darkness. Exile is exile. And exile is a force concealing God. Again, the way it's at the first glance, and its appearance, its content as it is until we flip it over, it's a dark klipa. It's a really extremely dark entity that acts against God, and that's why it acts against all divine interests. And since God's love is to his people, to the Jewish people and to his children in a very deep way, so the exile comes to make the Jewish people question if they're still God's children, if they're still God's favorite. So we've gone through hell for 1,800 years. The Rebbe says, however, suddenly we find a phenomenon that's, I mean, some can argue and say, well, it's the modern world, it's the world progressive, the world came out of the dark Middle Ages. Yeah, is that really so? Take a look in the world now, in the pockets of anti-Semitism that we see. Did the world really come out of? Yes, it did. In many ways, yeah, we're a sophisticated world and technology. But is the hatred to the Jewish people amongst these pockets of individuals any less? No, it's still the same insane hatred, super rational hatred. What I'm saying is, it's still natural, if you can say, for the world. When I say natural, I mean it's still the nature of exile, which we're still in exile, to be anti-Semitic, to be anti-Jewish, and to make problems to the Jewish people wherever you can. Yet, a magical transformation took place in the last century. And that is once after the Holocaust, when Jews came to the shores of America, especially in the United States, we found a country that was very hospitable and very inviting, if we can say, and extremely, extremely kind to the Jewish people. In the words of the Rebbe, that the most of the Jewish people live in countries, he doesn't speak only on the United States. He mentions in countries that are countries of kindness, empires of kindness. Beginning, he says, and primarily this country, in which most of the Jewish people, both in quality and quantity. Quantity, we can understand most of the Jewish people lived in America, at least in 1990 when the Rebbe was talking. Now it shifted. Most of the Jewish people living already in Israel. But in 1990, most of the Jewish people lived in America in terms of quantity and also in terms of structure. Meaning, I would say, rabbis, yeshivos, Jewish charitable organizations. America is the greatest pillar of Jewish support, if you can say, at least back then. And now we can say a lot of it shifted to Eretz Yisroel. In any case, the country of the United States where most Jews are is the biggest support for Yidden. And here the Rebbe uses very interesting lashon, which I was still a little struggling with what the Rebbe means with these words, is that it's a country that that we're seeing that they help and they assist the Jewish people in many ways, enabling Yidden, enabling Jews to come to an internal, in the words of the Rebbe, a geula pnimis b'avodas Hashem, to an internal liberating state in the serving of Hashem. That means even though they're not yet assisting the actual redemption, which is the gathering of all the Jewish people to the land of Israel and so on and so forth, we're not there yet, but they are assisting the Jewish people to liberate themselves in their service of their own internal exile. Now, what does it ever mean by that? We're used to always seeing America as, America was always a challenge to Judaism. And in many ways, we would say that when Jews came to America, they became seduced by the American way of life. They became open for assimilation, chas v'sholem, God forbid, and to become more materialistic, and in many ways distance their hearts from serving Hashem. In this talk, the Rebbe has a whole different look at America. No, the United States of America is assisting the Jewish people to be more Jewish. How? Well, if people are assimilating and so on and so forth, that's not the country's doing. The country's doing, I guess, again, I'm trying to figure out what the Rebbe means in this. I don't have exact clarity. It could be that just a mere freedom that we're able to learn Torah, doing mitzvahs. We don't have the oppression, the hardships. We don't have the extreme conditions the Jews had earlier, which created tremendous burdens and difficulties for Yidden to be Jewish. The fact that, and the government also assists in government assistance to schools, including religious schools, and so on and so forth. That's the assistance that probably he's talking about, which help Jews have less headache, and when you have less external pressure, you're able to devote yourself in a more calm, and of course people have free choice, and they can take that extra freedom and chas v'sholem use it for indulgences and to get coarse and to become more distant from Hashem. But that's not being done by the country. So that's l'chura that's what I'm seeing, probably what the Rebbe means. But it's very interesting, he says, once they assist the Jewish people in a manner that we should be able to come to a geula pnimis, to an internal redemption in avodas Hashem, that the United States is helping the Jewish people, which will now enable them, hear these words, it will now enable the Jewish people to do the particular avodah they need to do to actually bring the actual geula, not just on a personal level, but for the whole world. I find these lines very, 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 very important. The freedom that has been given to us, which up till 1991, which the Rebbe is referring to at that point, has not yet liberated the Jews to actually do the avodah to bring the Geula. But it did enable Jews to do the avodah to liberate themselves from their internal exile, which will now give the Jewish, he says these words, Ad sheyasu es avodah, which will now give them the ability to do the work, shetavi es geula kipshuta. So it seems like that's the method. If we want to bring the Geula in the literal sense, the actual redemption, we first have to experience personal redemption. And from personal redemption, we can extend that redemption to the entire world. So it's important to know that. But it will enable us to do so. And therefore, being that the United States of America is assisting in this process, so therefore, there you see that the Golos, the exile itself, it's the exile, the circumstances of exile that brought us to the shore of America. And yet, in the United States, we're getting a tremendous boost to be able to serve God in a way that's unhindered, and eventually, and hopefully already now, do what it takes to actually bring the Geula. And here the Rebbe says interesting words. And once the Jewish people do the work which will bring them to merit the actual redemption, then this very country, the United States of America, will assist in the actual Geula itself, in the redemption itself. To do what? It'll assist Jewish people to return to Eretz Yisrael. Like the pasuk says, they will bring your brothers. I didn't get a chance to look up this verse. It's a Nachum, which seems to imply, the Rebbe is using it, that the nations themselves will bring your brothers to Eretz Yisrael. So I think this is huge. This is very, very huge. Because what this is really saying is that, first of all, it's changing the notion. I mean, maybe we're already familiar with it because we've heard the Sichas and we've heard this talk, and I've been speaking a lot about it, so maybe those listening to this class have heard it, but I think it changes the mindset regarding the whole Mashiach process. We're used to thinking that, the Gullus, and the Jews have always been thinking, when we thought that Mashiach was coming during the Second World War, during the Holocaust, it wasn't that the world was going to assist. It was the world was so ugly and so anti-Jewish and so miserably dark, and that Mashiach would be a lightning rod from the sky that will save the Jewish people. A powerful Redeemer will come, and the nations will hang their face in shame, and God will redeem his Jewish people and punish the nations. That was the way Jews looked at it. And this idea that, no, the nations will turn around and assist the Jewish people is a huge, huge, huge turnaround and understanding. But it goes hand in hand with changing the perspective on Golus and Geula. The Geula is not a new world. Geula is the same Golus, but liberated. So therefore the powers of the world, what's the Golus? The powers of the nations. So you can say the very Romans and the power of Edom, if we can say, who is the leader of the nations, turns around to assist the Jewish people and will assist the Jewish people returning to Eretz Yisrael. I think this is, if I can interject with just a thought of my own, I think this is what we're seeing in the last short while, because what we're seeing now is at least the current government is strengthening the bond and the hold of Jews over Eretz Yisrael. The fact that the Golan was announced the fact that Jerusalem was announced as the capital, the fact that the two-state solution is now something that is almost disappeared completely. The Arabs are still, of course, fighting to keep it alive. Jordan this week was trying to keep it alive, and Russia didn't want to accept the United States peace initiative to enhance financial assistance to the Palestinians or whatever it is. But in as much as the United States is concerned, and it changed basically the narrative in a very big way, and it created within Israelis also the understanding that the two states are not the best way to peace. It's not going to happen that way. So these are huge, huge, huge things. Eliminating the threat from Iran, which is not yet completely eliminated, but severely weakened based on these are all things that strengthen the security and the possession of Yidden over Eretz Yisrael, and looks like hopefully very soon over Yehuda and Shomron as well, what they would call in the old language the West Bank. And that too, slowly the grip of the Klippas is falling away, And where is it coming from? The Israeli government doesn't even have the guts to do it on their own. It's coming from the nations. It's coming from the nations. And not from all the nations, but it's coming from the United States of America that's leading it, not all of America, but at least half of the United States, led by the current administration. It's amazing. This is it. This is the assistance. That's what the Rebbe is talking about. That's the way I see it. I mean, I don't have another explanation. And now the Rebbe continues. Let's go back into the thing. And as much as this was in the United States of America, and I do want to mention one thing before I forget. The one thing that has changed from 1990, which is 1991, when the Rebbe said this, to now, which is 28 years ago, the one thing that changed over here, other than we see the assistance suddenly coming so strongly, is that in 1991, the Rebbe was still talking about that most Jews are in America. And now most Jews are already in Israel. Most Jews are already in Israel. So if anything, it's only more intense, the Geula and so on and so forth. Which only makes sense, because what doesn't make sense is why there's still some of us here when all Yidden should be there already, based on the intensity of what we were told. In the last year, the Rebbe says, to add to this, in the last year we see that this relationship, or this attitude, if we can say, to the Jewish people has spread to other countries as well. Which countries? Even countries that were holding out, the last antagonist countries, the last countries that still had what we might call an evil empire that was persecuting Jews, mostly the Soviet Union. So their attitude was, even after the rest of the world, kind of the modern world, was giving the Jewish people liberty and freedom to behave and to live as Jews with relative non-interference, and quite on the contrary, with quite a bit of assistance across the world, again led by the United States, but actually happening in the rest of the nations as well. But now we're seeing the last year, but the Soviet Union was still one stubborn remnant of the dark ages. And they kept in their Iron Curtain a few million Jews, at least 3 million Jews, trapped with persecution. I mean, they couldn't keep their Yiddishkeit open for all these years. And suddenly, out of nowhere, they had a total turnaround and change of heart. And what do we see? That they let go, as the Rebbe says, in their restrictions on the freedom of the Jewish people, in their ability, in their religious freedoms, that Yidden are able to do their avodah and Torah and mitzvahs, and also in regarding them, the ability to leave the country, to exit. And now, as I said, now they changed. Now they let the Jewish people fulfill Torah and mitzvahs. They allow the Jewish people to leave, to exit Russia without any limitations. And on the contrary, they're even helping the Yidden Jewish people to travel to Israel. They were actually supporting and helping it. And the Rebbe says that this is a somewhat of an introduction and a preparation for even a greater help that the nations of the world, of all the nations, in assisting the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel. So how do we make sense of all this animosity against Israel and all this kind of pressure that's limiting the Yidden, the Jewish peoples, in the last 20 years? You have to say that was as I see it, what we've witnessed since the Oslo Accords, and that whole thing was a gang up of that which is still trying to fight the Geula, a last attempt to fight it. And it failed. It reached its peak of resistance in the Obama years with incredible and deep, quiet, but deep animosity to Israel and to the Jewish people. But it collapsed. And what you're witnessing today in the news, the fight against this current president, I will say it again and again and again, make no mistake, that this is the last ditch. What do they want this president impeached? Why is it to try to squeeze something out of the Mueller investigation? Something, they can get something. Even though kind of he came to the conclusion. Why are they trying to revive it? Why are they It's the last remnants of the last klipa. Mamish, the klipa is flickering. It's like that. Klipa is not like a lamp, but I'm using it's darkness. But if you can imagine a dark lamp, a lamp of darkness that's on its last flickers, and it's going out. It's fighting its throes of resistance for the last moment to try to hold on and to destroy this process, because this is new phenomenon. To have such a powerful force of assistance from the nations of the world, led by the United States, and again, is nothing short of a miracle. To me, it's clear that President Trump is the result of the thousands of years of work, of the thousands of years of the work, redemptive work, in which we purified the world, elevated the world, and transformed the world. And this is the product. And I mentioned he doesn't have to be an elegant person. He doesn't have to be a refined human being. He can be coarse. That's the whole idea of Dira B'Tachtainim, that which is coarse aligns itself with holiness. He can be coarse, but in its coarseness, it's consistent with God's will. That's the idea. And I think that's right. But this is a chiddush. Here's you have to understand the Rebbe's chiddush. The Rebbe's chiddush over here is that the Geula comes from within the world. And when we're looking for Mashiach, we have to look at the nations. So many Jews, religious Jews, observant Jews, they're seeing these things, and it looks nice in some ways, and the other ways, like there's this tremendous resistance, and it looks like there's a certain rise in anti-Semitism as well, and kind of confused. And it's hard to set what's this all about? What's going to happen after Trump kind of is defeated, or but if you don't learn this, then it can be very, very nerve. I don't know, what would it be? It can be simply said disturbing. I think with this understanding that there has to be eventually a transformation in the nations of the world regarding the Geula, and they're the ones that make it happen, we have to look for those signs in the world. I don't see any better signs than what we've been seeing recently and continue to see. So now we continue in Perek Yud Gimel. But I think it's also just one more thing. We have to appreciate the novelty of this, because we're all, young Americans born over here. We don't know another world. We always were born in freedom. We don't realize that we're in the tail end of an exile of such, where the attitude towards the Jewish people was so horrific. The fact that this changed is nothing short than a miracle, and it's the miracle of the redemption. Now we continue. Here the Rebbe says, in addition to seeing the nations assisting the Jewish people, there's another element over here. And that is that the nations themselves are becoming more civilized and more altruistic and more giving, selfless. And that's another very, very important thing. Because Mashiach's world is not only a transformation in terms of how the nations treat the Jewish people, but also how the nations treat each other, themselves as a people, and how they treat other nations. And that is, you see, and again, from 1991, the Rebbe started pointing out that you see already a magical change. And what is that change? That people are conducting themselves in a way that the world is no more the jungle it once was. And the jungle it once was meant the survival of the fittest. Those that were stronger, they were the ones who persecuted or took advantage of the weaker ones. And that has been the long story of history. And that's a jungle. That's the way the jungle operates. If you have a purpose in creation, if you have a God with a master plan, you would hope to see that the world will behave in a more godly manner. What's the first thing we expect of creation? We know Olam Chesed Yibane. The world was built on kindness. So the world has to emulate their creator in kindness. True kindness means you're doing something for people, not because for your own benefit, because you really want to do. And that kind of kindness is true compassion, sincere compassion and kindness. And we're beginning to see that in a global scale, the Rebbe says, which is all an indication that there is a God, that there's an owner, that the creation is bringing a profit to Hashem, that this is an enterprise, that God wants something of it, and that is the world become more godly. And that's expressing ultimately, when he will reveal himself, his kingship. So it's not like it was in the past, he says, that it was the Jewish people that were trained and brought up to be a people of, we looked out for each other. That's been a Jewish trait, that Jews have been, from earliest of times, we were a people that were born and bred on compassion, on kindness, on charitable acts, on giving and on caring towards each other. That's the sign even of our natural state, as it says in Tanya. Even our animal soul is preconditioned towards goyim lechasadim, which means being kind, and rachmanim, and being compassionate. And especially with Torah and mitzvahs and so on. So Yidden were the ones who lived, if you can say, a higher life, a more purposeful life, not self, absorbed only in oneself. So the Rebbe says in the past, it was the Jewish people that were the ones exclusively making a dwelling place for God in the low. What do we mean by that? In the low means the material world, which is the world of our body. Our body is part of the material world, where the nature of matter is to be self-absorbed. So the nature of the material is to be like a monkey and want everything for oneself. So the Jewish people transcended their bodies and acted and expressed their neshama, their soul, which is all the attitudes of giving and kindness and so on the like. Now and other nations, contrast to that, the many nations of the world. Now it's interesting, the Rebbe is very careful with his words. He says individual nations, doesn't say everybody, but individual of the nations of the world behaved in a very cruel way one to each other, and were preoccupied primarily in their own personal gain. And number one, I couldn't care less if someone else is starving next door, as long as I'm okay. Or even worse than that, if someone else was weak, and one nation is like a shark, smelled blood, so he came running and gobbled the other one up, took advantage of the other person's weakness. And that is history for thousands of years. Now the Rebbe says, one of the unbelievable miracles, not miracles, one of the miracle indications that happened, and we're seeing it happening in the world today, in which we see that the world is preparing itself for the redemption, and the Rebbe sees this all as part of the Messianic process, Mashiach process, is to the idea of charity and education. Two fundamental principles that are required for a civilized world. We need to invest in education and in giving, in charity. So it is known, and it's been written in the Rebbe has printed in the newspapers, the occurrences that happened recently, that this country, he says, the United States of America, that is founded on charity and on kindness, utilized her incredible military strength to save, to assist and to save, and to save people from a very far away country, distant, people that have no connection to, even though that the United States of America did not get any personal benefit from this. The Rebbe is referring to there was a civil war that broke out in Somalia, and at that time the United States, and pictures were coming in of the horrible starvation, the condition, and the mass murder and all that was going on, and it was tugging on the hearts of the people of the country. Then President George Bush authorized food drops and medicine and assistance, and they came in with helicopters and planes, and the army was utilized to go in, even though it was dangerous. In the end, about 43 American soldiers, or 143 American soldiers, were killed in the 2 years, I think, of intervention. American lives were lost, People got hurt, and yet we brought assistance and saving people from disease and from hunger, so much food, so much assistance. For what reason? No personal gain other than the fact that it hurt, it was weighing down on the conscience of the people of this country, that there are people that are suffering terribly, and that these people need assistance and we need to help them. That is a first time in history. That a country should use its military, which military is made for warfare, which up till this point was used just for selfish motives. Of course, for protection and for selfish motives, but that is now being used completely altruistically, completely selflessly, to help and to assist, and that's the will of the country. And that is incredible. He says that they're using planes instead of using the food that they're giving and the clothing that they're distributing for their own citizens. They're using it to save, the Rebbe calls them anoshim umlolim, which translates to desperate people that are in a very needy state. And particularly, he says, to save small children from the cold and from other dangerous situations, to give them, right? And over there you see the rachmanis, the compassion of the people of this country, that when they heard and when they saw how people are suffering, even though they're not their relatives, and even though they had no connection to them, this country was awakened to help these people. And this is fitting to the shita, to the outlook of this country regarding charity, that they help people in the whole world, and they don't even wait for the request, the people to send in a request. In addition to that, he says, it is known that in the last short period of time, the president of this country came out with a special announcement talking about first President Bush, that regarding initiatives regarding to education, to improve the education of the country. And he says this is consistent with this, that when he became president, he already announced that he's striving to be known as the education president because of his actions and the changes that he wants to do in education. Now, the Rebbe says that the chiddush, the novelty in these things, it's understood. It's what's so great about it. By Yidden, by the Jewish people, it's not such a chiddush. It's not such a novelty, because we were trained from our way for thousands of years. We've been educated through Torah and mitzvahs to be sensitive and to caring and to feel compassion and the like. And also, the great emphasis on education has always been at the foundations of Judaism. That's what a whole Pesach Seder is about. And that's where Judaism is all about, education. But this shows us, but the chiddush over here, that this is happening by the nations that have not been so, throughout ages, so invested in this type of behavior. This indicates even more that there is a balabayas, that there is a creator, that this world is not a jungle, which he says only that is the true foundation for charity. The real givingness, the true foundation of givingness, comes when you have a fundamental belief in God. And the same is also in chinuch, in education, that the real success in education can only come when the educated has a belief in a creator. And then he has true morals and ethics. And that needs to be, and we're seeing recently when we had the whole aftermath of the Poway, in which came back up the idea of a moment of silence, so on and so forth, which is connected to this. And there are other things that he says in Yanim that are happening, B'shbacha Pratis, that we see in even in one's particular life. All this is in a way that the world is indicating more and more and more that the world is helping us to fulfill and complete our project of making this world into a home for Hashem and to bring the Geula. And the Rebbe adds over here also this, that in the last week, I don't know what he's referring to, in a certain corner in the world, maybe it means Australia, I'm not sure, they found precious gems and diamonds and the like. And this is the blessing of the Eibishter. in which it's similar to the time when the Nasiim brought the clouds, actually brought the gems, and that was a big discovery. And the intention of this, that it should be used to dressing a bride. That a bride should be dressed keshute kala and to add tzedakah and the like. So what's the maskana? What's the final maskana of all of this? What's the last word? The last word the Rebbe says, I'm going to read it inside. The geula comes dafka through our service in the galus. What's the service? Being magala alufi shaloylam bigoyla, revealing the aleph in the gola. So that this generation is the last generation of galus, becomes the first generation of geula. If galus and geula would be two separate things, it should be two separate generations. It's not. It's one generation that's both. And the Eibishter helps that we're seeing in the occurrences of lately how the world itself is assisting and leading to the redemption. And B'Pashtus, the explanation of it, as we said before, what does this all mean? That every single Yid has to encourage us to increase our intensity and our work in the work that brings the Geula. Particularly, like discussed in the previous Farbrengen, we should learn in the Torah about Mashiach. In Torah Shebiksav, which we know that all of the Torah is filled with the Geula. In Torah Shebal Peh, Mishnah, Gemara, Midrash. Ubezeh Gufa, the Rebbe says, we have to add Pesach Haraf and Pesach Sheni, because that, again, this talk was given around Pesach Sheni time, that there's nothing is lost, that everybody should make a Cheshbon Tzedek regarding a true accounting and a correct accounting. If there's anything we missed, so now's the time to retrieve it. That we can now add more and make up for lost time and lost opportunities. And we should know that there's never too late. And if we were asleep till now, we can catch up and get it done now. The main thing is, I want to conclude with this, is very, very special. The main thing is that it should be revealed already and it should be fixed already, everything that it seems to have gotten lost, or things that really got lost in exile. Now, what was one of the things that got lost in exile? Here's the Rebbe says a shocking thing. What is one of the things that got lost in exile? Well, lost can also mean, sometimes, a positive way of lost is that it's so high that it can't be revealed. Lost because it's too deep for us to touch it and to know it. And that is Mashiach. Mashiach got lost in exile because he's floating a little bit above our eyes. He's above. And that's why it says about regards to Mashiach that it remains in God's heart and it's not revealed to Hashem's mouth. Even to Hashem's mouth, it's not revealed. It's in Hashem's heart. That means it's embedded so deep that it's lost in the revealed world. And therefore Mashiach will only come behesach hadas, will come unexpectedly. Like it says about Mashiach, will come in a manner of a metzia, like you find a lost object. Motzasi David Avdi, I found my servant David. Like it is stated in Mizmor Peites and Tehillim, which was the Mizmor that the Rebbe then finished, the 89th Mizmor in Tehillim. And when does it reveal itself? When does the Mashiach pop into the world? He says, Mizgal b'Mizmor Tzadik. It reveals itself in the Mizmor of Tzadik, when we start saying the 90th capital, which was the Mizmor the Rebbe started saying that year, which is the Mizmor of Tfilah L'Moshe. V'hinoyam Hashem Elokeinu. And the connection, so here in Ara 26, unbelievable. Why does it reveal itself in the Mizmor Tzadik, which is connected to 90 years of the Nasi Hadar? Why? The Rebbe brings in Ara 126, well, this will conclude that Lahoyer, that in the letter Pei, the Jewish people were redeemed from Mitzrayim. With the letter Pei, it says Pakot Pakadati. And therefore, Lahoyer, the Rebbe says, that Moshe was 80 years old when he redeemed the Jewish people. In other words, because the Geula comes through the letter Pei, which is the letter Pakot Pakadati, so Moshe the Redeemer, when he was revealed, was 80 years old. Tzaddik, he says, that's what the Eibishter is going to use to beguile the Jewish people, and he's going to tell them Tzemach Tzamachti, which is the language of the Geula. Ish Tzemach Shemai, whose name is Tzemach. And we know what the gematria of Tzemach is, that the Rebbe already told us why the Tzemach Tzedek is called Tzemach, because its gematria of his name, which is also the Rebbe's name, is the same gematria of Tzemach. So Ish Tzemach Tzemai, Metachtav Yitzmach, and when is that? It was revealed in Shnas HaTzadik, which I mentioned many times. The Rebbe said Mashiach was revealed already that year. Shnas HaTzadik. And what is it ever referring to? When he himself became 90 years old. So that's what it says over here. So it should be revealed. All this will be revealed in the third Beis Hamikdash. The main thing is that we should see this already. We shouldn't have to say any more pshetlach and explanations. We should see this in a complete revealed way. Thank you for joining. Bez Hashem. We'll see you all in Yerushalayim way before next week, but this class should continue in Yerushalayim. All the best.